Hello, everyone. You are watching the Asian American Herald, a new media network featuring Asian Americans in the capital region of New York. This show is being aired via live stream on Facebook, and a recording will be available afterwards at our Facebook page, Asian American Herald of the Capital District. I am Himanee Gupta-Carlson.
And I'm Shruthi Nattanmai, and we are the regular hosts of this twice-weekly show. Tonight we're going to discuss intergenerational commonalities and differences among children of immigrant Indians in the United States.
We are interested in this topic because both Shruthi and I grew up in the United States as children of parents who immigrated from India. However, we both grew up in different parts of the U.S. and in decidedly different eras. I am a child of immigrants and was born in the United States in 1962.
I'm also a child of immigrants and was born in the United States in 2000. So tonight we're going to talk about our experiences, and to do so, we have invited the founder of Asian American Herald, Ashok Adikopla, to interview us. Ashok, take it away.
This is something new. All right. Thank you both for asking me to fill your shoes for tonight. I'm definitely looking forward to a stimulating conversation. So to start off, can you both start by telling us a bit more about yourselves? And where did you grow up? What are your interests? And what did you study? May I ask Himanee to start with? And then Shruthi, you could probably add more. Yes.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So I grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Iowa City, Iowa, and grew up for the most part in Muncie, Indiana. I've had 2 or 3 careers. When you get as old as I am, you tend to have more than one career. So first I went to college to study journalism, and I worked in journalism for about 20 years. Somewhere in the middle of that, I started to burn out, and I went back to graduate school, and I got a master's degree in American Studies and a doctorate in political science. In the midst of doing all that, I began writing, kind of more creative nonfiction, and I also began teaching. So after getting the doctor title in front of my name, it really made sense for me to pursue a career in teaching. And so I did that and became, in 2010, a professor at Empire State College and moved out here to New York. And I also am a farmer, and that's actually probably very much my passion. It would be lovely in some ways if I could do that full time, but I do also very much like my writing and my teaching, and so that's me.
That's wonderful.
Yes, wow. Shruthi. I definitely have a less impressive resume, but I'm still in school. I go to the Fashion Institute of Technology, and I'm studying advertising and marketing communications with a triple minor in art history, film and media studies, and English with a concentration in writing. I was born in Albany, and I grew up in Clifton Park, New York. And I've lived here all my life before moving to the city for school. As far as interest, at school, I'm the beauty editor for a magazine called Blush Magazine, which is our lifestyle beauty fashion magazine. I take acting classes. I have played the flute for a long time. And I also have done different types of Indian, whether it be traditional or Bollywood dancing, since I was pretty young, and I enjoy choreographing those dances and watching them. And I don't do that as much anymore, but it's definitely one of the bigger interests of mine. And I also have a blog, so I like to write as well, more on the fiction side, but yeah.
That's interesting. Definitely. Shruthi, I know it's not as big as or as long as Himanee's, but you have a busy one too. So what led you both to pursue those areas of study? Let's start with Shruthi.
So I was very confused about what to go to school for, if I'm being honest. Senior year of high school, I thought I wanted to go to med school for a long time, believe it or not. That was like I think that was definitely a product of my upbringing, that goal. But I knew I wanted to go into something a bit more creative when I realized that I liked making things or creating things, and I really liked working in a collaborative environment, which kind of steered me toward the business side of things, because advertising and marketing has a bit of both, has a bit of the technical and the creative, and oftentimes many of my projects were working in groups to put everyone's ideas together to kind of create something bigger, which I really liked. And of course, New York City, that also, I'd be lying if I said that didn't have a part to do with everything, because I think being in the city has allowed me to be exposed to so many different ideas and so many different types of people, within my major and just outside too, which is why I ended up going there and pursuing that. And the 3 minors are also have to do with my interests. So those were just kind of add-ons after I got there and realized that I could do more than just my major.
So if I can, I know I was supposed to, go through my next question considering the time, but if I may add or ask something away from this, you mentioned about the city life. I'm sure Himanee also might have had, although she grew up in a different area than an actual city, but what do you guys consider in terms of exposure and learning side of things, growing up in Clifton Park versus New York City? What's your experience like first, and then we'll move to Himanee.
For me, I went to high school and I went through all of public schooling in Clifton Park, and the demographic in my school was predominantly white, middle to upper middle class. So growing up in that environment, I definitely had a particular mindset, I would say, and I was around a certain type of kids. And then when I got to New York City, and I would say that most of the kids I were around had pretty much same interests, like one varsity sport, accelerated classes, band, that same profile, I would say. But once I got to school, and not even just school, even outside, as you said, just being in the city, I feel like the city is a really good melting pot for people from all around the country, the world. So that was, even within being there like a month, I would say I was just introduced to people from so many different backgrounds. My roommate from last semester was from Michigan, and even though you think that's not, she's from a very rural area, and even though you would think that's not a difference, like just there's small differences in mentality and just lifestyle that they're used to that you kind of get exposed to, and in addition to interests and talents and all of that, that kind of helps you become more open-minded, I feel.
Himanee?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I always joke that I majored in journalism in order to avoid an arranged marriage. My parents, my mother particularly, really wanted me to be a doctor, and she also really wanted to marry me off to a good Indian boy of our Gotra and etc. So very kind of views that I am strongly against and didn't understand when I was younger, but definitely did not want that for me. So I did like to write, and I did want to write in a way that I would be able to financially support myself. And journalism was the thing that came up for me. And so that's what I did. I actually did move from a relatively small town, Muncie, when after finishing high school, I went to college at Northwestern. And Northwestern is in Evanston, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. And both the campus environment and the city itself were really eye-opening for me. Just like you, Shruthi, I suddenly became exposed to so many different people and so many different backgrounds and perspectives. And my best friends in college, I graduated with my journalism degree in 1985. So I think we're coming up on like 35 years or something. Um, but my best friends in college are still some of my best friends today. I've made many, many, many more friends over the years in the different places that I've lived since then. But those people are still like very, very. We're still very close. One of them called me last week while I was pulling weeds, and just sat there and chatted for like an hour, and it was really really amazing. So yeah, I think the city was a really good environment. And I did live in cities until I moved to upstate New York and first Saratoga Springs and then Greenfield Center, which is quite rural. I lived in Kansas City, I lived in Seattle, and I lived in Honolulu. And then I lived in Seattle again before I came out here to upstate.
Honolulu. I think some names just they just stand out for some reason, I guess. But yeah. Well, we'll definitely talk on another show about your experience in Hawaii, probably. But so so let's get back to if I may ask, growing up as Asian Americans, despite the generational difference, what kind of pressure did you feel in terms of what you're expected to study or what careers to pursue? I think if I heard correctly, both of you mentioned the word doctor at least once. So so let's, yeah, if you can. I think Shruti, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as I said before, I wanted to be a pediatrician, to be specific. Not sure why, because I'm not great with kids, but I don't. Regardless, that was the goal of mine for a long time.
Okay.
So much so that I remember during my senior year of high school, I enrolled in AP Bio. Um, I can't say I enjoyed it, but I did. I feel like not so much from my parents, but just from um, extended relatives or my like the Indian community or just the other Indian kids that I went to school with. Even though there were not that many, they all did have an interest in medicine and the sciences and were good at it. Whether that was their personal interest or they too felt pressures from um, the outside. But I definitely felt so pressured to go into the STEM field in particular, just because of that pressure or just because of that outside influence that I enrolled in AP Bio, and I went through that entire senior year. I remember just thinking like, why am I here? I don't. It's not that I was bad at it. It was just that I did not enjoy it, and I think that even outside of STEM, for me, the biggest pressure or the biggest word that I heard over and over again was stability. And engineering and medicine and all of those things provide that stability that was praised so much, whereas marketing and other creative industries that I want to go into are sometimes more of a gamble. So in that case, that's again not so much from my parents, which is interesting to me because a lot of my friends felt that pressure from their parents in regards to applying to schools and choosing their majors, but my parents never really said anything about that. It was more so other kids my age, which in my opinion, I feel like that pressure is more impactful, or not impactful, but stronger than parental pressure, just because um, you spend time with them every day at school and you hear what they say almost constantly. And when you're in classes with them and they too are preaching what other Indian parents preach, it gets to you a little bit. Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. As you were talking, I was remembering high school, and I was thinking about just kind of like that time period. It was the 70s. So I grew up in the 70s, and at that time, I there weren't really any other Indian or other South Asian children my age. There were like a few people, but we didn't really hang out or do things together because We came from different regions of the country. We pursued different religions, and I don't know. I just had my own friends, and I was on the swim team. I played piano and the violin. Um, and when I got into journalism and became like a staff writer for the school paper, that's where a lot of my energy went. But I think, part of my parents were putting pressure on me to be a doctor or an engineer or a scientist of some sort, but I really was not good at math or science, and I really didn't enjoy it. I got grossed out by pictures of like what a heart looks like or a brain. Those images, which I find so fascinating now when I go in for like any kind of an X-ray, that I always want to see what's on the screen because I want to see I want to see what I look like inside. But back then, it just was very unpleasant for me, and I also feel like there weren't really very many role models for women in careers, particularly maybe growing up in Indiana. But so, my choices were like a school teacher, um, a nurse, which my parents did not want me to do. I think they really had some casteist, classist views that kind of looked down on nurses, and Mary Tyler Moore, who was a journalist. And so those were kind of, I think, some of the influences that really shaped me and my choices. Um, I think my parents, they wanted me to be happy and they wanted me to do what I did best, but they were loners also. I mean, they didn't have a whole lot of people to really turn to look to for guidance on, what do you do with this daughter who's growing up in this place that we don't really know that much about, even though we voluntarily moved here.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's There's some similarities, definitely. I mean, choosing the way the parents suggested certain jobs only or majors only. I think one of the reasons Shruti mentioned is the stability. But do you both feel that those pressures are easing as the years progress, or continuing to be enforced by parents, friends, and the community, especially the Indian American community, I guess?
So once I had a book published, oops,
You went on mute.
a
Okay,
little
yeah,
bit mic,
yeah,
a little bit of a
yeah.
mic issue. It's funny. I think once I hit, and maybe this is good advice for you, Shruti, at age 35 or 36, all pressures fell off. Nobody cared. Nobody cared if I wasn't married. Nobody cared about the career I was pursuing. I was just kind of on my own to do what I wanted to do to the best of my ability. And I think today, the community that is formed in Muncie, the South Asian community, I think they really consider me one of their own, and they are very proud of me. They're very proud of the fact that I wrote a book about them, and they're very proud of kind of some of the other things that I do in the community. And, equally, I'm proud of them. So we have kind of like established a more reciprocal give and take relationship. Now, in terms of have the pressures eased over time for others, I don't think they have. I mean, it's funny when I see literature like this book that I've been reading periodically, Good Indian Girls Marry Doctors, and the Netflix serial Never Have I Ever, which we're going to be discussing on the show in a few weeks. I see things like that, and I see the relationships between Indian teenagers and their parents, and I'm kind of like, whoa, it's been so many decades, but many things remain the same. But that's just my perspective. I'm interested in yours. Should they?
No, I agree with you. I don't think that I think there's definitely more Asian American kids and Indian kids pursuing careers outside of STEM, but I certainly don't think that pressures from the Indian community have lessened per se. I think I remember one of the biggest things, or yeah, comments that people used to make when I first enrolled at FIT was that they had this idea that I didn't go into STEM because I wasn't smart enough to go into STEM. So there was this comment that would be made like, oh, she only went into marketing because that was like the only option she had. So I think that mindset, or yeah, that mindset has to change a bit, and in order for people to become more accepting, because like my mom used to always say, if everyone went into engineering, who's going to do the other jobs? I was if everyone liked engineering, who would do everything else? And I think for that reason, I don't believe the pressures have eased. And as Himanee was saying, in the media too, I think the media and pop culture and entertainment, movies, all of that has a lot to do with bringing a bit more, like easing this pressure as the years progress. And I think right now there's not too much representation. Never Have I Ever was great in terms of representation in mainstream, and like it's a Netflix show, so it was trending for a while. So a lot of people saw it. It was great to see a South Asian lead, but then again, I think representation in those very highly consumed media platforms has to increase in order and be depicted in like a more, what am I trying to say? Like it has to, they have to showcase a more diverse range of Indian people within the Indian community in order for viewers to become more accepting of that. I think I definitely don't think that's the only way, but I think that's a great tool.
Wow, that's cool. So, Himanee, let's go back to you. And as a woman, I think you touched upon already, but as a woman who married outside of the Indian community, and what was the initial reaction of your close family and friends? At the time, did you see a general hesitant or a distaste towards the interracial marriage?
Yeah, not really. Again, keep in mind, I married late. I married when I was 42 years old, and I think everybody was just relieved that I got married. And they, but I do think there is, and I had a partner before who was of Chilean ancestry, and we were together for about 13 years before we parted amicably. But I think there is a certain level of discomfort. I don't think there's distaste, but there is sort of like, you know, my parents are vegetarian, but they are always worried about whether my husband would be able to survive if he came to visit on vegetarian food, and should they order some chicken or should they find some meat for him somehow. And it's kind of like there is a wall. There's like this barrier about, oh, we don't know what to do with him. And I think it also goes the other way with my in-laws. My mother-in-law and I think, have a really wonderful, cool relationship, and we do talk about a lot of things when we do talk. But also with the rest of the family, it's sort of like, I think they think I'm really, I don't think they think I'm really a part of them.
That's good. All right. So, Shruti, I know you're not married. So, what attitudes does you have seen towards interracial marriage, either within your family or in the Indian community? And do you feel the kids of your age, around 20s, have different views? Are younger parents passing down different views, and it's more acceptable, or anything different now?
Certainly. I think right now, kids my age, so I'm just about to turn 20, so even my age and younger, I would say, even my sister's age, I definitely don't think it's viewed as a big deal, to be honest. Interracial marriage is amongst Indian kids, amongst other Asian kids, amongst everybody. I don't feel a negative image of interracial marriage being even spoken about in conversation. I've definitely heard. I've seen some negative attitudes toward interracial marriage within my extended family or within the Indian community, especially at certain gatherings. If there's one couple that's an interracial marriage, or that's interracial, but I've seen. I don't think it's intentional per se. I don't think the negativity is intentional. I just think they talk about it in a certain. It's not like they're not talking about them in like a bad way. It's just that when they see it, they feel the need to point it out, which I think is a problem in itself, because even at things like this, like Springfest or like big gatherings where it's predominantly people from the Indian community and the local Indian community. When there is an interracial couple, there's some pointing, there's some talking, which I would say can be problematic. And I wouldn't say that it's as bad as it used to be, but I think it still could be worked on.
Yeah, totally true. All right. So, in what ways you both consume Indian culture growing up? Did you feel embarrassed at all about culture while living in towns where the Indian population was quite a small, maybe? I'm sure most of you grew up in the towns where I don't think it's that huge population-wise, unlike like New Jersey or Atlanta or Chicago or anything, right? So let's start with Shruti.
Yeah. For me, I think the biggest way I consumed Indian culture, whether this is authentic or not, was Bollywood films and music mostly. My dad watched cricket and all of that, but I think for me personally, it was mostly my parents speak Tamil and Hindi, so like there'd be both mixed into there. Um, so I was definitely, my dad would always play songs. I don't understand either language. I understand Tamil better than Hindi, but like I don't really understand either, which is interesting to me because I still consumed at such a high rate. Um, as for the embarrassment, I certainly did. I think I don't think it was as much the way I spoke because I was born here, so I didn't have like an accent or anything, but it was the way I looked. I remember I think it was just like small comments that would be made about my skin tone or whatnot that I don't, whether it's intentional or not, and especially when you're younger, kids just kind of point things out very bluntly. It's not meant to be like malicious or anything, but it happens. Or I was a part of. I think for me, I was a part of theater and dance groups for a long time. So being in that environment with a lot of kids, Caucasian children, it was, I think, difficult. Even in terms of, just for me, they would have to bring different makeup. Just for me, they would have to bring different shades of tights. Like it was just like knowing that I was the only one who needed something different. That was kind of embarrassing at the time, I would say. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Himanee.
amazing. That's amazing because I was always the different one. And I always, I kind of got picked, got poked fun at a lot, got picked on, wasn't really ever fully accepted. And I think a lot of it was because my hometown was and is still to some extent highly segregated. So, and there were actually railroad tracks, and the whites were on one side and the blacks were on the other side. And I was brown, and there weren't very many brown people, and we didn't really know where the brown people fit. So it was kind of almost better to be out of sight, out of mind. Um, I didn't like going out in the sun because I didn't want to get darker than I was, which is interesting because now I practically live in the sun. Um, and yeah, I didn't, the way I consumed Indian culture was actually primarily through my family. My mom had an altar in the kitchen, and um, my parents had some records. So I remember some very old classical Indian songs with a great deal of fondness. And actually, you know, when I hear them, sometimes they really do evoke something powerful and strong in me. Um, and so that was about it. We lived in India for a year when I was about 10 years old. And while that was kind of like a horrifying experience from my perspective as a 10-year-old, I think it was very formative to my life. And I just wrote a letter to my 17-year-old niece and told her kind of a little bit about living in India for that year and how I think it really did change my outlook on the world and what I was going to do with my future. So I don't know if that's fully answering the question, but that's kind of what I will leave you all with.
Well, it sort of does, but um, let me, I think, let me complete that discussion. If I may ask, how did you get over, both of you, from that discomfort or embarrassment? I mean, it does sound, especially when you said the rail trick, I mean, the track dividing the whites and the blacks. I mean, that sounds, I don't know what to say, but yeah, please describe.
Yeah, so I wrote a book. I wrote
Okay.
a book called Muncie, Indiana, Middletown in Asian America. And Middletown is a name for Muncie because Muncie was a site of study as typical America. And in the book, part of what I do is unravel the myth of typical America by interviewing South Asians that I grew up who were in Muncie when I was growing up and others who came later. But doing that book, which took me a very long time, it was about 18 years, believe it or not, from conception to completion. But doing that book really helped me actually see the structures of racism and casteism. It helped me look at religion and, kind of like what I call Christian supremacy and kind of Hindu supremacy in India, really analytically and differently. And in doing that, I was able to kind of take my pain and shame and rechannel it into kind of a desire to, do social justice work and make right with the world in whatever way that I could. And so doing that it took care of the problem. I'm not unshamed anymore. I'm not, I love my hometown actually. I would go back there to live if an opportunity presented itself. And, I got over it that way. So I think everybody should write a book about their childhood experiences.
Wonderful. Shruti?
Yeah, so I think it definitely took me a while to get over that discomfort and embarrassment, but I would honestly credit dance for getting or lessening that feeling. I remember, I think it was in ninth grade when I started choreographing dances for Springfest, actually. And I decided to ask a couple of my non-Indian friends to participate. Just they were dancers. They did tap, jazz, ballet, and I figured, why not? It's Bollywood. It's fun. So I asked them, and they said yes. And then the more we did rehearsals, and then I showed them videos and all of that, the more I realized that a lot of their comments and a lot of their, yeah, I guess just some of the things that they said that I found hurtful growing up, not specifically them, but some of my peers growing up, was partially, mostly because of a lack of education about Indian culture and just not just Bollywood, just a lot religion, all of that. And I think by doing Springfest and by including people who are not Indian and were not familiar with the culture, it allowed me to, I would say, educate them in a sort of way, because, and then I think including them and then talking to them about it, and then doing that activity with them allowed me to be less embarrassed about it. And in ninth grade, my friend and I, we were in this world culture, world literature class, and my teacher actually asked both of us to do like a Bollywood dance in front of the entire class. So there's like 35 kids, and I remember like I was so nervous. I did not want to do it, but I remember after doing it, people were like, some of the girls came up to me. They're like, "Hey, can we join your dance group?" And I think at that point, I was like, "Oh, so people don't think this is weird. People are like actually interested by this." And I think just talking about it, which was something I was so hesitant to do. I tried to hide it. Don't know how I could hide it. You can like, but I did try to hide it. And I think talking about it, and I would say Springfest, a lot of, I would credit that with um, helping to get rid of that feeling.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just keep thinking about dance also is such an embodied expression. And so it puts you right in your body. And it reminds me of, I was doing a story about Indians in Seattle when I was working for the Seattle Times. And some of the young women who I was interviewing, one of them said, you know, when I wear something like a silvar kameez in public, I feel very good. It makes me feel really good in my body. So I actually tried it. I tried putting one on and wearing it to work or wearing it out. And it was kind of like a really transformative experience. I was like, wow, this is actually a way of not really normalizing, but normative, I guess, coming to terms with the self and um, learning to feel good about who you are.
That's wonderful. I think there are a lot of other topics that we have to discuss, but the time is almost, we're at that point. So, but definitely, Himanee, about your book, one day we need to discuss about that book, and also Shruthi about your fashion industry and dance. So we gotta, have that discussion going on one of the other shows. But for now, let me just thank everyone for joining us this evening on the Asian American Herald. And I'm Ashok Adikopla, and I have been the guest host just for tonight. And my guests were show's regular host Shruthi Nattanmai and Himanee Gupta-Carlson. The Asian American Herald is a Facebook page, um, media outlet dedicated to discussing topics and building community among Asian Americans in the capital region. Please send us your story ideas and look for the recording of this show and our Facebook page. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you, Himanee. Thank you, Shruthi, not just
Thank
for joining
you.
tonight, but for being the wonderful host that you have been. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right,
It's
have a
been a
good night.
pleasure. Yeah, thank you.